Hello everyone, welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. Last time I had read Show the World You Love Him, such a great fic, and this is the second part of that series, which is told from Aizawa's perspective. This fic is entitled Someone Else's Game. Bullshit. Shota seethes, biting the word out with a sharp, clean snap of his teeth. There's been a potent mix of disbelief and sick, cold rage building inside of him since the moment that Nezu opened his mouth. Now, Aizawa-kun, Nezu chides almost absently from where he's hopped up to sit on the edge of the couch. Calm down. Getting emotional will not resolve the situation any faster. It's a false accusation and we all know it, Nezu. Shota doesn't bother to acknowledge Nezu's statement. Instead, he just leans forward a bit in his desk chair and does his best not to grind his teeth. We've had numerous reports besides the initial one all saying the same thing, Nezu points out calmly. Numerous reports founded on bullshit, Shota repeats, hands clenched into fists on his desktop. And these students who reported the issue don't even have regular contact with either Shinso or Midoriya. The dorm system has brought out an even higher degree of cross-year interaction, Nezu counters, and add that to the time that students may spend in the halls and cafeteria or various other places on campus as a whole, and there's ample time for unsupervised interactions. Mostly within corresponding courses, Shota replies, even as he reaches out to tap a finger on the top of the small stack of papers that Nezu had handed him earlier. These students are almost all in upper-year gen ed classes. I think we're missing the real point here, Hizashi speaks up then from where he's been leaning against Shota's desk, arms crossed and a frown tugging at his mouth. He'd been the only other person in the lounge with Shota when Nezu had come in, and given Hizashi's status as Shinso's former homeroom teacher, and knowing Nezu as he does, Shota's more than a bit certain that that was by design. Most things with the principal are. Enlighten us, Yamada-kun, Nezu prompts cheerfully. Shinso adores Midoriya, Hizashi points out, never one to shy away from the emotional avenue of a situation. He's always been much more emotionally intelligent and socially aware compared to Shota, who has always been rooted more firmly in logic. It's just one of the many ways that they balance each other. It's obvious every time they're around each other. Shinso wouldn't do something like this to him. Hell, he wouldn't even have to since Midoriya obviously adores him back. Hizashi is, Shota knows, completely correct. Even Shota had been able to track the two's speed run of a relationship despite it seeming to come completely out of nowhere in his opinion. But then again, given how Midoriya had outright maimed himself in the sports festival and then somehow came out the other end with Todoroki almost surgically attached to his side, maybe it hadn't been that unusual. Shota's beginning to think it might just be a Midoriya thing. The kid pretty much wears his heart on his sleeve at any given moment, but he's also kind of unsettling in a way that Shota just can't seem to put his finger on, no matter how hard he tries. Regardless of his personal morals and attachment to Midoriya, it's still not true. Shota cuts in then because he knows that the emotional avenue isn't likely to be the argument that sways Nezu, no matter how hard Hizashi tries. The particulars of Shinso's quirk don't work that way. He's got a hard time limit and prerequisites. The kind of long-term manipulation that these reports are claiming is something beyond the known scope of his quirk. Yeah, Hizashi's quick to say, a wry sort of twist in his mouth as he backs up Shota without missing a beat. And even if it did work like that, with as many hits as Midoriya takes during training, he'd have snapped out of Shinso's control ages ago. You both make a number of excellent points, Nezu agrees easily, his version of a smile pulling at his muzzle. It's then that the suspicion Shota's been harboring in the back of his mind the entire time finally solidifies. Because Nezu knows all of this. Of course he does. There are days when Shota's more than a bit convinced that Nezu knows practically everything about everyone in UA. If there's anyone who appreciates and lives by the old adage of knowledge is power, it's Nezu. So of course he knows all about the ins and outs of Shinso's quirk. Of course he knows about his relationship with Midoriya, even if there's still a self-professed and possibly misleading disconnect when it comes to the emotional side of the entire matter. So Nezu obviously knows that these are, at best, students taking things out of context, or at worst, an active attempt to sabotage at least one Hero Course student's life and career prospects as well. Nezu knows all of this. Shota's sure of it. He just doesn't care. There is, as there always seems to be with Nezu, something else at play here. Something that Nezu values much more than the impact these rumors might have on two of Shota's own students. Nevertheless, Nezu waves the both of them off as he hops down off the couch. We still have to do our due diligence, I'm afraid. Accusations such as these should never be taken lightly. Please bring Shinzo-kun and Midoriya-kun to my office this afternoon, once classes are done for the day. And as far too often seems to be the case, Shota's obviously more than a few steps behind on whatever scheme that Nezu has been cooking up. Oh, Nezu stops at the door. And do be sure not to say anything to either Shinzo-kun or Midoriya-kun as to the nature of our visit. Seeing their initial reactions in real time will doubtlessly be much more informative. Just as quickly as he'd come, Nezu was gone again, slipping out of the door silently and off to orchestrate more of his own unique brand of chaos, no doubt. For a long moment, silence hangs thick and heavy over the room. He's up to something, Hisashi finally says, shoulders rounding in a sigh as he reaches up to pull his glasses off and massage the bridge of his nose. When isn't he up to something? Shota huffs back, head thunking down onto his desktop. Nezu schemes in his sleep, honestly. Hisashi's hand is warm and gentle on the nape of Shota's neck, long fingers kneading briefly at the tension that always seems to linger there. All we can do is try to head him off at the pass on this. Doesn't matter what we do. Shota turns his head just enough that his words aren't muffled by the wood anymore. He'll have already thought about it and found ways around it. That doesn't mean we can't still try, Hisashi points out softly, hand squeezing his nape lightly before he lets go. Now come on, kitten. We've got to get moving. We got a little time before classes start, so let's do what we can to make sure the little listeners make it out of whatever this is in one piece. We can worry about everything else afterwards. Shota gives himself another moment before he pushes himself up from his chair. I'll catch Inui up to speed, Shota tells him. If Nezu wants to have some kind of meeting with those two about this without calling in either Midoriya-san or Shinzo's guardians, then he shouldn't refuse to allow a licensed pro and a counselor to sit in. You can get Recovery Girl to come, too, since she's actually speaking to you right now. Gotcha, Hisashi agrees easily enough, glasses back in place and thumbs hooked over his belt buckle. Counselor and school nurse, check and check. Me and you'll both be expected to go, obviously. Otherwise, Nezu would have just cornered you with this instead of both of us. So that's at least 4 people who can try and keep him in check. Think that'll do it? Yes, Shota nods, even though he knows it's a lie. There's really no such thing as keeping Nezu in check, unless he allows it, and there's at least one other person that they should probably be including on this for a number of reasons. And if the look on Hisashi's face that he cuts him over the rim of his glasses is anything to go by, he knows it as well. Fine, Shota sighs. I'll get the idiot. But it'll be after he deals with the hell class for the day. There's no way he'll keep his mouth shut otherwise. Because, as Shota has learned the hard way, if it involves Midoriya, then it already does, or eventually will, also involve Yagi. The rest of the day passes in a semi-peaceful manner overall. Even when he tells both Midoriya and Shinzo to come to the teacher's lounge after class, nothing more pressing than Bakugo and Kaminari both existing in close proximity to Shota's last fragile nerve happens. Even the extra close eye that Shota keeps on Shinzo and Midoriya, as well as the rest of their group of not-so-subtle delinquents by default, at every opportunity throughout the day, doesn't see anything too far out of the ordinary beyond Shinzo looking a little more tired than usual. There are no signs of guilt or panic in Shinzo as far as Shota can see, and no fear or relief to be found in Midoriya's normal sort of jittery intensity. There's no sign that he can find that points to there being any truth to these rumors to be seen at all in either of his students. It sets a small part of Shota at ease, seeing the day continue on as if nothing's amiss, even as the tension of sorts that Shota can't seem to shake settles itself in his shoulders. It's an almost electric feeling, like the calm before the storm, that seems content to build on itself. He does his best to tuck it away because, as Hisashi had said, the most important thing is to get the 2 boys through whatever it is that Nezu's trying to pull in one piece. Then, hopefully, they can all move on and handle whatever comes afterwards later. And, more importantly, Shota can concentrate on getting to the bottom of these bullshit accusations. Because if they haven't been made in good faith, if he finds out there's a more sinister reason behind any of it, well, there's a reason why Shota has the highest expulsion rate in UA history, and, contrary to popular belief, not all of those students were in the hero course. When Shinso and Midoriya show up at the teacher's lounge after classes just as instructed, Shota wastes no time in leading them on the way to Nezu's office. They weave their way through the twists and turns of UA in silence before they come to a stop outside a door that pops open before Shota can even knock. Nezu and more of the little mind games and power plays he likes to always seem to enjoy so much. "Aizawa-sensei," Nezu calls from within the room. "Right on time as always. Do come inside. Shinso-kun and Midoriya-kun as well, of course." Eager to get this done and over with, Shota steps through the door, Shinso and Midoriya following on his heels like silent little shadows. Nezu sits behind his desk, customary teacup in hand and eyes fixed on Shota's students with an intensity that makes the hair on the back of his neck rise up just a bit. Still, Shota bites his tongue and moves to stand against the wall beside Hazashi, who looks to be trying his best to stay calm and collected. There's a grounding press of knuckles against the side of his leg that of him shifting his feet enough to press the toe of his boot against Hazashi's in a firm but subtle nudge of acknowledgement. Shota's unsurprised to see a grim-faced Yagi settled into another chair between a pursed-lipped recovery girl and an irritable-looking hound dog. "Please," Nezu speaks up again, waving one paw in Shinso and Midoriya's direction. "Come sit down so we can get started." Midoriya and Shinso move forward together, steps almost completely in sync, as they settle down into the two empty chairs sitting in front of Nezu's desk. Are we in some kind of trouble?" Midoriya is, unsurprisingly enough, the one who breaks the silence first, hands fidgeting with the material on his pants before he plants them on the arms of the chair instead. "This is a rather delicate situation." Nezu sidesteps the boy's question easily, teacup clinking against the saucer as he sets it down. "So, perhaps it would be more beneficial to the proceedings if we simply dive right in." Shota bites back the urge to sneer. The anger that clawed at him earlier this morning has spent the day festering in his gut, becoming something molten hot and churning in the process. He stays quiet for the same reason he'd chosen to listen to Nezu and not confront Midoriya or Shinso about the rumors on his own. It's the only way to see what Nezu's playing at, the only way to get him to tip at least a portion of his hand right here and now, because if he missteps too soon, then Shota knows that Nezu will simply recalibrate and get at the boys in a different, less semi-controlled way. "It seems there's been a few rather unsettling accusations put forth from a number of different directions," Nezu says delicately. "So, first and foremost, Midoriya-kun, I have to ask if you are safe. Is there anything you'd like to report? This is a safe place where no harm will come to you, so speak freely." "Sir?" Midoriya's brow furrows and his mouth turns down sharply. I don't understand." "It has come to the attention of the staff and myself," Nezu replies, something dark and calculating in his gaze that almost makes Shota want to step in between the chimera and the boys, "that there is the possibility that your relationship with Shinso-kun is non-consensual." Shinso flinches so abruptly and sharply that Shota feels it in his bones, as the boy's expression twists in some sick mix of disgust and despair. If there'd been any doubt in him as to whether or not Shinso could have really been taking advantage of Midoriya in such a way, it would have been erased in that moment. But then it's Midoriya's reaction that grabs Shota's attention. Because beside Shinso, Midoriya instantly goes almost dangerously still in his seat. "Elaborate." Midoriya's voice is solid, steady in a way that Shota's never really heard before. Between one breath and another, Shota finds himself standing straight and alert. It's almost as if the tone of Midoriya's voice had reached inside of Shota's chest and grabbed at something that instantly forces Shota up off the wall. Unease coiling in his chest, Shota keeps his eyes locked on Midoriya's still form, his shoulders tense in an instinctive preparation. "Multiple students have expressed concerns for your safety on the basis that Shinso-kun may have coerced you into a romantic relationship," Nezu says evenly, as if he doesn't notice the sudden and dramatic uptick in the undercurrent of tension sparking across the room. "Naturally, the staff must investigate all such complaints thoroughly for the safety of the students in question." "Naturally," Midoriya echoes, an eerie sort of blankness in his voice. "Now, Shinso-kun," Nezu turns his attention in Shinso's direction then, "do you have anything to say in your defense?" Shota turns his direction towards a gray-faced Shinso who opens his mouth as if he's going to speak, but before he can say anything, there's suddenly a sharp splintering sound that makes Shota twist more than he wants to admit. Attention swinging back towards his other student, Shota feels his own eyes go wide at the sight of the arms of the chair Midoriya has been gripping have practically crumbled to the ground on either side of him. They've been utterly shattered by the strength of Midoriya's hold on them. "My boy." Yagi leans forward in his seat as he speaks up, skeletal face creased even deeper than normal. It's a smart move in Shota's opinion. Whatever relationship those two have still baffles Shota on a number of levels, but it's obvious to anyone who's ever been around them that there's a connection between Midoriya and Yagi. If anyone in the room besides Shinso can calm the boy down, it's sure to be the number one hero. Only, Shota quickly realizes, that's apparently not as true as he'd always assumed it would be. Standing where he is, Shota can't see the look of Midoriya cuts in Yagi's direction, but whatever his expression is, it's more than enough to shut Yagi up instantly. Yagi leans back in his chair, his face gone slightly chalky, and turns to stare directly ahead instead of saying anything else. "You seem upset, Midoriya-kun," Nezu says calmly, unruffled by Midoriya's outburst. As a matter of fact, Shota would even say there's something almost gleeful in his tone, which is something that Shota intimately dislikes on a number of levels, for a number of reasons. One of which being the fact that a gleeful Nezu is never a good sign for anyone involved. Upset? Midoriya's head tilts to the side just a bit as he turns back to look at the principal, an almost animal-like gesture. Shota's only seen him perform once or twice before. The last time had been right at the beginning of his now infamous confrontation with Mineta. That seems like such a mild word for what I'm feeling right now. "Please," Nezu smiles just a bit, an expression that sits unnaturally on his face and again, absolutely never bodes well. "Elaborate." "Well, sir," Midoriya starts, more blatant disrespect condensed down in his voice than Shota's ever heard from the kid. "I find it really distasteful that someone would accuse Shinso of conduct unbecoming of a hero student on this level, and that the staff here would humor it at all, since everyone in this room knows it's false. As I said before, all complaints of this nature must be taken seriously," Nezu counters, tone mild. He's obviously still towing the same line that he'd fed to Shota and Hizashi this morning, the same one they'd both known was bullshit the moment it come out of his mouth. "Bullshit." Midoriya practically spits the word like he's plucked it right out of Shota's own thoughts, surging to his feet and leaning forward enough to slam his hands down on Nezu's desk. The wood dents in around Midoriya's palms, but Midoriya doesn't seem to notice, too caught up in his staring contest with Nezu. It's a show of pure strength that is honestly more than a bit unnerving. Shenanigans aside, Midoriya is normally so unassuming that Shota sometimes forgets the sheer strength the kid is capable of without even bothering to pull on his quirk. Shota knows then that this entire thing has somehow managed to get even more out of hand than it already was, and given the subject matter, it was already pretty fucking far out of hand in Shota's opinion. Either way, though, he knows that he needs to step in now, needs to make sure Midoriya doesn't say or do anything he'll regret. Shota will be damned if he'll lose either of these two kids to teenage tempers, no matter how righteous and whatever hell kind of game that Nezu's trying to play. Shota takes a step forward then, one hand already on his capture scarf in precaution, starting out Midoriya's nickname. The look Midoriya shoots in his direction is almost enough to have him taking that step back and away instinctively. Instead, Shota does something he hasn't done since he was a student, since he was younger than Midoriya himself is now. He freezes. Midoriya's normal mix of cheerful but determined anxiety is gone from his expression. In its place is something that Shota can only describe as dangerous. His mouth is twisted into what can only be described as a snarl, and his eyes are dark and sharp. Shota's sure that, for a split second at least, he can see the familiar jade lightning of Midoriya's quirk sparking in the depth of his eyes. It's a look that he'd never thought he'd be on the receiving end of from one of his students, especially not Midoriya, of all people, no matter how much the kid has occasionally unsettled him in the past. It's a look that makes Shota feel almost hunted. But then it's gone, Midoriya turning his attention back towards Nezu, as if he hadn't damn near stopped Shota's heart. "Hitoshi has never and would never attempt to force me into anything against my will outside of consensual and authorized quirk training." Midoriya practically bites the words out, diction sharp enough to make even Mini Tensei proud. "Because that's what this is about, right? His quirk?" Again, Nezu smooths one paw over the top of the other, a pleased sort of stimming motion that Shota recognizes very well, and keeps his eyes firmly on Midoriya's face. We are obligated to invest all accusations of such a nature, especially where hero students are concerned, for a variety of reasons." "Then why did it take so long for Mineta to get expelled?" Midoriya shoots back viciously. The way he practically flings the question at Nezu makes Shota bite back a snarl of remembered frustration. "Why?" Midoriya plows on, not bothering to pause. "Was he allowed to terrorize our female classmates for so long, despite multiple complaints against him, but Ikeda and his friends, because we all know that's where this came from, launch a campaign against Hitoshi, and you all immediately jump to this?" Midoriya lifts a hand to wave it around the office before he slams it back down onto the desk, denting the wood yet again. "Don't bother to answer that. I already know." Even with his unease from moments before, still swirling inside of him, Shota can't help but agree with Midoriya. Mineta and his continued enrollment in the hero course had been an issue for Shota since the day that Nezu rejected his first expulsion form for the lecherous brat. Nezu had, just as Midoriya had obviously figured out somehow, had plans that involved Mineta that caused him to utilize his rarely touched veto power as to who remained in Shota's class. The argument they'd had afterwards had been vicious by their standards, but Nezu had stood firm on the issue for months, even as the complaints were piling up. Shota had broken more than one mug from Hisashi's shatter cabinet out of sheer frustration. He has never and will never appreciate Nezu's politics and schemes impacting his class so blatantly. "Midoriya," Nezu starts to speak up, but this time Midoriya doesn't even let him finish. "I already knew how this school handles outright violence between classmates," Midoriya keeps going, more than a bit viciously. "But I had hoped that it wouldn't support blatant quirk discrimination beyond the obvious bias of the entrance exam. I guess that was my mistake." Beside him, Hisashi breathes out a low hiss of air that Shota feels reverberate in his soul. Ice traces its way down Shota's spine yet again. The more physical aspect of heroics training has never been something Midoriya has ever complained about. Shota knows that for a fact. If anything, it's been the opposite problem with Midoriya, who has always seemed so eager to overwork himself. So the fact that he brought up violence between classmates at all is a red flag of epic proportions. And the accusations of blatant quirk discrimination hit just as hard, because Shota knows exactly how this looks from the outside, knows intimately how this must look to Shinso and Midoriya both, and he hates it. Hates that Nezu had put them all in this position, placed them firmly on one side of the equation and his students on the other, by the way he's chosen to handle this entire thing. Shota even hates himself just a bit for having gone along with it as much as he has so far, because, biased entrance exam notwithstanding, Shota has always tried to stamp out any quirk-related prejudice he comes across. He and Hisashi both had suffered enough of that growing up, have even seen the results more times than they can count while out on patrol. Neither of them are willing to just deal with or blatantly ignore it in their classrooms or from their students now. But it seems that, somewhere along the way, Shota has missed more than one step where at least these two are concerned. Or maybe, Midoriya continues lowly, my mistake was applying here at all. Maybe UA isn't the best choice of hero schools if they're going to entertain accusations that are blatantly false and made by a group of students led by someone who has been verbally and physically assaulting Hitoshi for weeks now. The chill that almost seems to sweep through the room is no match for the rage that roars even higher inside of Shota. The thought of Ikeda hurting Shinso, like Midoriya is saying, of any of the upperclassmen laying hands on one of his kids like that outside of training is enough to have Shota clenching his fist around his scarf so hard that his knuckles pop. Beyond the fact that he would never do anything villainous at all, Hitoshi's quirk is a call and response-based emitter that I've already proven I can break out of independent of outside assistance. Midoriya keeps going. Ikeda Kino is just jealous that Hitoshi has done what he never could and never will do himself, earn his spot in A-class. Hitoshi's going to be a fantastic hero, and I refuse to be used as an excuse to damage his reputation and record. Midoriya straightens up then, hands pulling themselves out of Nezu's desk, as he turns just enough to bend down and grab his bag up off the floor. He rifles through it for a few seconds before he pulls out a black-covered notebook. He places it almost delicately onto Nezu's ruined desk. This has everything I've managed to gather on Ikeda Kino and his group of friends, Midoriya tells Nezu, holding the principal's gaze with a steadiness that far too people are capable of. It also has a complete log of every insult and instance of assault that Hitoshi has been subjected to in the past few months. You can cross-check with Recovery Girl's records for any injuries, and I'm sure you have other sources that you can consult too for these kinds of occasions. Shota can't help the thrill of surprise he feels at what Midoriya so easily handed over here. One of his mysterious notebooks, something that he normally guards so completely and fiercely that not even Bakugo gets near them anymore. Hitoshi deserves an apology for this, Midoriya practically declares then, like he isn't attempting to wring something out of Nezu that Shota's not even sure the principal is legitimately capable of sincerely giving. And if UA really is the best of the best, then Ikeda deserves to be punished. His record deserves a black mark for false accusations and quirk discrimination, as well as multiple instances of assaulting a fellow student. And if those things don't happen, then I'll do whatever I have to do in order to make sure they happen anyways. Shota agrees with him, of course. Ikeda and his other little cohorts are going to be punished, and as far as Shota's concerned, their time left in UA is numbering in hours now. And that's something that Nezu will either accept or Shota will take drastic measures of his own. Is that a threat, Midoriya-kun? Nezu speaks up then, paws smoothing almost gleefully across the cover of the notebook that Midoriya passed him. No, Midoriya immediately denies, that solid part of steadiness from before etched into every line of him. It's a statement of fact. If Hitoshi gets punished for this, if his record is damaged and Ikeda is allowed to get away without consequences, then I will be withdrawing from UA and attending a different heroics course elsewhere. I will also do my best to take as many of my classmates with me as I can when I go, and I will scream every single mistake and misstep that I've seen UA make from the rooftops. And I won't stop, even after I climb the ranks. I'll keep going until people have no choice but to take me seriously. Shota blinks once, twice, a third time. Because Midoriya is absolutely serious. And Shota, more than the rest of the staff, except Nezu, perhaps, understands just how big of a threat that statement of fact actually is. There's at least half a dozen students in his homeroom alone that Shota's sure would follow Midoriya without even a moment of hesitation. Even more than that, who would likely be easy to sway to his side, and a few who would stand with Shinso even without Midoriya's influence. And that's not taking into account students in the other classes who Shota's sure would also get caught up in Midoriya's wake, especially once his reasoning and accusations against UA and the staff were announced. Midoriya, for all that he never seems to truly realize it, has a strange sort of charisma to him, especially with Shinso at his side now, grounding him in a way that he hadn't had before. If, Shota realizes, Midoriya truly puts his mind to it as he's saying he will, they could be looking at a willing mass exodus of hero students, the likes of which UA has never seen in its history. That alone would be enough to give the school's credibility a serious hit, and that's not even taking into account the staff, who might also see fit to resign as well. Shota has no illusions over the fact that, should Midoriya leave, Yagi won't be far behind, which, of course, means that Nezu knows all of this as well. I see, Nezu says quietly, and then he grins, an almost unnaturally wide and tooth-filled expression that makes Shota's eyes narrow suspiciously when he immediately turns it in Shinso's direction. I do apologize for this unpleasant matter making it so far, Shinso-kun, Nezu announces calmly, as if the past 10 minutes have gone differently than Shota knows they did. We will, of course, take all of this into consideration and conduct a proper investigation, but given the vehemence of Midoriya-kun's defense of you, I think it's safe to say that your record will remain clean here. Please do keep up the hard work and leave the rest of this mess to me. Midoriya, in another stunning show of uncharacteristic rudeness, steps back and reaches down to grab Shinso's hand. He pulls him up out of his seat, Shinso's fumbling to grab his bag as he stands, and then sketches a barely there bow in Nezu's direction. We're going back to the dorms now, Midoriya announces more than anything as he ushers Shinso past where Shota's standing without even looking in his direction. The door swings shut behind them quietly. For a long, charged moment, the office sits in complete silence. What? Shota takes another step forward, away from the wall, then another and another until he's hovering just in front of Nezu's ruined desk. The fuck was that, Nezu? I'm sure I have no idea what you're talking about, Aizawa-kun. Nezu blinks up at him, paws pressed flat against the cover of the notebook he can't seem to stop touching. Don't, Shota says sharply, resisting the urge to add a handprint of his own to Nezu's already ruined desktop. Don't play games with me, Nezu. Not right now. Not after you've gone a step too far. Have I now? Nezu tilts his head to the side just a bit, black eyes gleaming. Yes, Shota hisses. You were going to back Shinso into a corner, even though we all knew that the onset of those accusations were false. Don't deny it. I could see it. Midoriya could see it. Well, I had certainly hoped he would, when this entire matter started, Nezu says easily. It would have defeated the entire purpose of the exercise if Midoriya-kun hadn't been able to see just how damaging such accusation would have been to Shinzo-kun. Thankfully, he didn't disappoint. Shota goes abruptly still, mind clicking away. In fact, Nezu says, just a tad quieter, the earlier glee creeping in around the edges of his tone, I would even go so far as to say Midoriya-kun achieved high marks all the way around. Nezu. Yagi is the one who speaks up then, something tight and controlled in his voice. What exactly are you implying? Was any of it real? Shota cuts in, dread and rage twisting together in his chest. Oh, Aizawa-kun, don't worry. Nezu waves a dismissive paw in his direction. I wasn't forced to go so far as to fabricate the entire thing. Ikeda-kun, while relatively charismatic, happens to be quite the jealous bigot. Plus, he has, just as Midoriya-kun stated, been physically and verbally harassing Shinzo-kun for weeks now. This was just the next step in a pattern of steady but ultimately petty escalation at this point. I'm sure you'll enjoy expelling him. And you just let that harassment continue? Hizashi speaks up for the first time. Of course I did, Nezu nods. It wasn't going to last forever, and if I had interfered, it would have reset the entire board. I would have been forced to implement another game plan to get what I wanted. Nezu taps meaningfully at the notebook Midoriya had given him. All of that, Yagi speaks slowly, sounding more than a bit out of his depth, in a way that Shota can't really fault him for. To get one of young Midoriya's notebooks. You could have simply asked him, Nezu. No, Nezu chides lightly. Better for something like this to be given than asked for. A gift of justice instead of a request for a concession Midoriya would have felt trapped into providing. No, this was a much better inroad. So Shinzo was what? Shota snaps. Just collateral damage? An acceptable sacrifice? Of course not, Nezu denies steadily. Shinzo-kun was never in any real danger from those accusations. He's innocent after all, and far too important to be wasted in such a manner. I simply needed both of them to believe he was. That's sick, Hizashi says quietly, solemnly. Nezu, that's just... why? Nezu hums lightly, sliding the notebook off to the side of his desk, with a flick of his paw before he reaches for his ever-present teapot and a fresh cup. The answer to that question is rather simple, really. Enlighten us, Shota practically sneers. I wanted to meet the real Midoriya. Nezu tells them, paws steady as he pours his tea. What? Hizashi asks, giving voice to the confusion that's practically saturating the room at this point. There's a quote from an old pre-quirk dictator, Nezu tells them after a long sip of tea. It goes, live with a man for 40 years, share his house, his meals, speak on every subject, then tie him up and hold him over the volcano's edge, and on that day you will finally meet the man. It's fanciful, ideological speculation made by a long-dead psychopath, but I admit that I rather agree with the spirit of the ideal, if not the letter. But alas, I don't have 40 years to spend analyzing Midoriya, and unlike many pro-heroes even, Midoriya is singularly driven not by his own safety, but by the safety of others. To meet him, to truly see him, I needed to hang the most intimate part of his heart over the volcano's edge instead. Yagi sucks in a ragged breath, and Shota can just barely hear the rumbling growl of displeasure Inui is making over the pounding of his own heart. Why? Yagi coughs out the question. Young Midoriya is a good boy. He's going to be a fantastic hero. Why all of this just to meet him? It's simple, really. It's because Midoriya-kun is our future #1 hero. Nezu says it simply, with such an easy conviction that it startles Shota more than a bit. You son of a bitch, Shota seethes quietly. You could probably have damaged the trust the two of my students have in me and this school irreparably. And for what? For a notebook and some sick thought experiment? There's yet another moment of almost tangible quiet, and then Nezu lets out what can only be described as a giggle. Oh, Aizawa-kun, Nezu says lightly, some mix of amusement and what on anyone else could have almost been pity in his tone. You don't think either of those boys actually trust you, do you? In that moment, Shota's sure that he stops breathing entirely. No, Nezu continues calmly. Neither Midoriya-kun nor Shinzo-kun trusts anyone, except perhaps each other completely. And they certainly don't trust any of us beyond our roles as pro-heroes. The way they held their silence about this entire situation instead of reaching out is proof enough of that. Even Midoriya-kun's admiration and adoration of Yagi-kun is, in a word, conditional. The noise that Yagi makes is somewhere between a ragged, bloody cough and a barely hidden whine. Recovery Girl is quick to reach for him, a severe frown pulling at her aged face, but something almost accepting in her eyes. Nezu reaches up then and goes to the side of one sharp-tipped claw down the scar that cuts through his face. You can take my word as law on that fact. Nezu flashes a sharp-toothed grin in Shota's direction, then like recognizes like, after all. Those two are nothing like you, Shota can't help but say, because they're not. There's coldness, a ruthlessness in Nezu that Shota's never seen in either of his students. Are you really so sure? Nezu cuts back. Or is that just what you want to be true? Because I believe there's a number of parallels between us. Midoriya-kun and I most of all, but young Shinso-kun isn't so easily dismissed either. In fact, I'm sure he'll play a pivotal role in the future going forward. Neither he nor Midoriya-kun are, after all, the type to let go of what they love easily. No, I believe that at least one of our future number one sides is rather firmly spoken for. Nezu sips his tea, an air of almost smug contemplation practically wafting off of him. I've allowed Midoriya to grow on his own for long enough, I believe, Nezu says. Perhaps I should have stepped in earlier when I realized that you didn't see him for what he was, Aizawa-kun. That was my mistake. But it's a mistake that ends now. He'll be reporting to my office for his study hall period from now on, and Shinso-kun will rotate through a selection of staff members who will be tasked with rounding out his skill set. We have so much to accomplish and relatively little time to do it in. Nezu pauses, drinks more of his tea, and then sets his cup back on its saucer with a delicate click. He reaches for the notebook Midoriya had given him. Now, Nezu says lightly, but a tone full of obvious dismissal, if you all would so kindly see yourselves out, I'm afraid I have a new project to begin. With Hisashi at his back and the others standing off to one side, Shota stands there in front of Nezu's desk for a long moment before he turns on his heel and stalks out of the office. There is, he loathes to admit, nothing else that he can do at this moment. He knows without even bothering to press the issue that Nezu won't bend any further today, and as much as he wants more information, Shota doesn't want to ambush and overwhelm either Midoriya or Shinso again so soon. So for now, all he can do is what he'd promised himself he'd handle earlier. He has a student to expel, and at least half a dozen more to verbally flay. And then he has a lot of thinking to do. Shota doesn't stir from his place on the couch when Hisashi finally makes his way into their apartment a few hours later. Hisashi toes his boots off, takes a look at the fresh hole in the wall and the already purpling skin of Shota's knuckles, and sighs. Come here, kitten, Hisashi says quietly as he settles down on the couch and holds one arm up. Shota tips himself to the side without a word, eyes closing as he focuses on the familiar and comforting warmth and scent that envelops him. They sit there together in silence for the longest time. One hell of a day, huh? Hisashi finally murmurs as he combs a hand gently through Shota's hair. Shota just grunts slowly in agreement. Ikeda was still crying the last I saw him, but he'll be off campus before nightfall, Hisashi tells him. Not sure where he'll go, since no other high school in the country is going to take him after what you did to his record, though. And the rest of his little group will be having detention with Nomuri until the semester ends. May the gods rest their souls. Little bastards, Shota huffs against Hisashi's stomach. Yeah, Hisashi agrees. Silence falls over them again, but it's a long, familiar, and ultimately comfortable one. We'll figure it out, Hisashi finally sighs, cutting to the core of what's bothering Shota in a way that he always seems to be able to. Together, we'll do what we have to in order to make sure the little listeners know we're on their side, no matter what other games Nezu might have in mind. They might not trust us now, but we'll work at it until they do. Hisashi says it like it's law, like it's some kind of undeniable fact. Says it in a voice with all the determination and strength that so many people tend to overlook in him. It helps that he's simply giving voice to what Shota spent the last few hours contemplating. He'd missed a step with Midoriya and Shinso both somehow. They had all, apparently. But as always, it's his own failure that eats at Shota. It's the fact that he had missed such a large chunk of the picture that it's making him think there might be even more things that he's somehow allowed himself to be blind to with this class, things he should have seen and acted on ages ago. Shota feels as if some veil he hadn't even known he was wearing has been finally ripped away, like he's seeing clearly for the first time in a long time. Somehow he'd fallen victim to the observational bias that he's always rallied so hard against. He'd made assumptions and leaps and never realized just where he was going wrong in the process. But that's going to end here and now. It had, in fact, ended back in Nezu's office with his students distrust being thrown so casually into his face. This time Shota's determined to see things for what they are, instead of what he thinks they should be. This time he's going to give Midoriya and Shinso, and every other kid in the class who might need them, undeniable, solid reasons to actually trust him. Shota's not going to let any of them drown again. Plus ultra. This concludes Someone Else's Game. Such a great series. I really love these fics. I thought it was really great that the author decided to do this one from Shota's perspective. So, as always, thank you guys so much for listening, and make sure to leave any comments and reactions below. Thanks so much.